Well, welcome everyone. My clock says it is 4 o'clock on the dot. So I want to welcome everyone here today. I'm Bernie Wiesen, and I'm the current president of the Joint Council of Extension Professionals, or JCEP. For those who may not know, JCEP is comprised of the 7 primary professional development associations in cooperative extension, the National Extension Association of Family and Consumer Sciences, NEAFCS, National Association of County Agriculture Agents, ACAA, Epsilon Sigma Phi, ESP, the Association of Natural Resource Extension Professionals, ANREP, National Association of Community Development Extension Professionals, NACDEP, National Association of Extension Program and Staff Development Professionals, NAPS-SDP, and finally, the National Association of Extension 4-H Development Professionals. If you are a member of any of those associations, organizations, you are a member of JCEP, in case you didn't know. The mission of JCEP is to elevate Extension's national reputation as an organization of excellence and synergistically leverage the strengths of member associations to foster leadership, collaboration, professional development, scholarly activity, strategic partnerships, and advocate for the profession. We are here for all of Extension professionals. 2 other programs that JCEP provides besides what you see today are coordinating and facilitating our Extension Leadership Conference, which is held every February and will be held in Savannah in 2026, and the Public Issues Leadership Development Conference, which will be held in April in Bethesda of 2026 as well, which is open to all Extension staff. I am thrilled to be part of this collaboration of program this afternoon. I had the pleasure of attending the Public Issues Leadership Development Conference in April and had lunch with Dr. Steele. Given the uncertain times we are facing at many levels, but certainly at the federal level, Dr. Steele suggested we put a small program of this nature together. A huge thank you to Dr. Steele for this concept and making it come to fruition. Some housekeeping. Please use the chat box to place any comments or questions you might have, and I'll be keeping an eye on that. I also want to thank behind the scenes, we've got Marcy Banaka, who's our communications coordinator here in our local Cornell Cooperative Extension Office of Rensselaer County. And with that being said, we're going to get right to the meat of it. Let me introduce you to Dr. Steele. Dr. Douglas Steele was appointed as Vice President for the Office of Food, Agriculture, and Natural Resources on January 2nd of 2019. The Association of Public and Land-Grant Universities, which is APLU, is a membership organization that fosters a community of university leaders collectively working to advance the mission of public research universities. He strongly believes in the power of the land-grant university to provide access and affordability to higher education, increase the profitability of agricultural enterprises, and transform families, youth, and communities. His prior positions and appointments include Director of the Texas A&M AgriLife Extension Service from 2012 to 2018, and Vice President for External Relations and Director of Extension for Montana State University from 2004 to 2012. Dr. Steele previously held extension and faculty positions at Colorado State University, where he was Assistant Director and State 4-H Program Leader, and at Purdue University, where he served as an Extension Specialist and Assistant Professor in the Department of Curriculum and Instruction, and both County Agent and Specialist positions in Texas. On the national level, Dr. Steele has served as a chair of the Extension Committee on Organization and Policy, which is ECOP, the ECOP Budget and Legislative Committee, the National Board on Agriculture and Assembly Policy Board of Directors, and the National 4-H Congress Board of Directors. He's also served as trustee for National 4-H Council, officer of E-Extension Foundation Executive Committee, and co-chair of the ECOP Marketing and Communications Task Force. Doug resides in Bowie, Maryland with his wife, Lori, and has 4 grown children and 4 grandchildren. So Dr. Steele will be speaking and has a short presentation. I will also go ahead and introduce Christina Laridaen, who is from Lewis-Burke Associates. This is the government relations firm that works with APLU on all things agriculture and extension. She has specifically been working closely with Extension for the last 4 years and has expertise with Congress, federal appropriations, and the agencies. She's originally from Minnesota and attended the University of Minnesota. So we're going to go ahead and start out with Dr. Steele, and I'm going to turn it right over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Bernie. I appreciate that introduction. It was almost exactly like I wrote it, so nice job. I am thrilled to join you today. If you did not hear the highlights of my career, Extension has been a very critical part of what I've done. I started as Assistant County Agent in Amarillo, Texas, where I was in charge of 4-H livestock projects and did all the judging teamwork and worked with a lot of our ag producers in production agriculture. A wonderful grounding and a wonderful career. September of this year, I will start my 46th year in doing higher education work, which does not mean I'm getting older. It means I'm very mature in my experiences. And I've always been a huge proponent of our professional associations. I think if I worked with you in Montana or Texas, you can attest to that. JCEP fills a very important role, not just in leadership development, but making connections that are very critical to being a successful professional, sharing best practices, and times that we can think better collectively than we can individually. And as I look back at my career, I've been a paying member of 3 of the JCEP associations, 4-H, ESP, once I reached the 5 years minimum that was required at the time to join that, and of course the county ag agents. I worked very closely with Family and Consumer Sciences. In fact, I was very humbled to receive their Friend of Extension National Award a few years ago. And throughout my career, I've worked with the Wildlife Association, Community Development, and also our planning folks. And so I feel like I'm a part of JCEP. I've invested in JCEP, and I really appreciate what you do in professionalizing our associations and working together across disciplines. I want to start with a couple things, and Christina and I have talked about this. I'm going to kind of talk about the process and how we do what we do. Christina will kind of talk about the mechanics and how we put that into practice. Then we want to leave plenty of time to answer any questions that you might have, because as Bernie said, we kind of brainstormed, would it be good to do this? And based on the response and the attendance, I think there's a need there. But more importantly, we need a strong national voice. And I always say that I believe my role and the role of Lewis-Burke Associates and what Christina does is we provide leadership, a strategy. We have relationships inside the Beltway. We amplify a national voice. But at the end of the day, what we advocate for is controlled by 100 senators and 435 members of the House. And there is nothing that can replace the local connections that you have. And so we want to talk about what that looks like and what that means. But I want to start with a couple cautions, because I don't want anyone to get in trouble, because you heard Doug and Christina say get more active and get involved. And so I think it's very important that you understand your system, and every system is a little bit different. Montana was a very small state, and a lot of our county agents and our specialists were very much engaged in the state legislative process. When I was in Texas, not so much. In fact, it was kind of very controlled about who goes to the Capitol and who does what. And when I was at Colorado State, it was very controlled, and you had to have permission to go visit, other than the couple times that we hosted days at the Capitol. So one, understand your system. What does that mean? Talk to your supervisor, understand what the goals are for the college that you're located in, usually College of Agriculture, Natural Resources, and Life Sciences. Know if you have a director of government affairs within your college that works on ag work specifically. And then more importantly, understand if your university has any restrictions or guidelines. And a case in point, we work with some universities, and if you would come to the PILD meeting and went to the Hill to make targeted visits, if they consider that to be advocacy, you have to report that time back to your system. And we'll talk a little bit about the difference between education and advocacy as we run through this. But I want to be very clear also, and I think this is the strength that I was talking to Bernie about, that we really need our JCEP members is that we need a year-round presence. No longer would you live in a day and a time where you spend 1 week on Capitol Hill in late February, early March, and get everything that's important and everything you want. And so we got to think about what happens the other 11 and a half months of the year where we're not in DC making these kind of visits. So what can you do? Not everything you do is advocacy. You can do all the education and information sharing you can do. Invite elected officials, invite their staff members to come to special events or field days or speak to groups when you have that opportunity. We really rely on you to build those relationships. So when we go into congressional office here in DC, they don't say, what is extension? What is 4-H? We had no idea that 4-H and extension is part of a land-grant university. We need you to help build those kind of relationships. The strongest position point extension has is you're a trusted member of that community. And so that trust also comes to DC when you come, but it also helps us when we gain entry and talk about the needs that we have within our programs. You have individual friendships. You know, I know when I was in Montana, you knew who the regional offices were in the state that represented your house, or you knew who the Senate offices were in the state. It's people that you see on a frequent basis. You see at the grocery store, you go to church with them, you see at youth athletics. And so those kind of friendships that you build are very critical to help us be more successful. And I think most importantly, in many cases, extension is the bedrock in those communities. And when I say extension, it's not just that location of the county extension office. It's many of our specialists that have state and regional responsibilities. You're a bedrock that people really want to come to when they need the trusted information they can rely on. So I want to make sure before we get through today and get you thinking before I start my formal presentation is, what can you do? Well, one thing you do is you bring that local voice. And Christina and I work with one of her counterparts that came out of congressional offices, and he said there is no substitute for telling a local story of how it impacts you. And so your connection with 4-H kids, with stakeholders, with constituents is critical, because when they tell a story on our behalf, it's no longer us that are getting paid to do it. It's people that have benefited from our programs that can share that story. We need to make sure that we're relevant. Christina and I are part of a Zoom earlier today, and they said, gosh, after 120 years, extension is no longer relevant. I believe we're as relevant today as we ever have been, but we got to use the right terminology, and we got to put our best foot forward, and we got to talk about how we are not just having a lot of programs and activities, but we are really having an impact, and there's a return on that investment. And most importantly, in today's world, is that if extension wasn't there anymore, who could step in and fill the gap? And I would say in many of our rural and a lot of our urban centers, there is nobody standing on the street corner that can fill the gap of what we do through extension and through our professional associations. And finally, I would encourage you to think about how you can incorporate your stakeholders, your committees, your youth into what we do that's important. Develop your own one-pager, not for advocacy, to say, hey, did you know this is what our county program does? Do you know this is our county program benefit? The more you can bring a framework around turning activities into investments in people and communities, the easier it is for us to do our job. So I'm going to take that very high stress moment where I click on the share screen button and see if this works or not. And we actually tried it earlier, so I feel good about that. Oh, excellent. Now, can I get some affirmation? Christina, thumbs up if you see Bernie.
Yep, excellent. You're good. You're good.
Excellent. Well, I'm going to run through just a few slides. Then I'm going to pass over to Christina, and then we're going to make sure we have question and answers session or get your experiences. If you're doing something now you want to share in the chat box has worked extremely well, we'd love to learn from each other and the best practices. So I'm going to jump into this, and I wanted to take an opportunity to talk a little bit about who we are, APLU. We're the largest presidential association for higher education in the country. What is interesting is APLU actually grew out of the Hatch Act of 1897 when experienced station directors and deans got their regional funding. They thought, if we're going to grow this funding, we should start a presence and affiliation inside DC. And so AG is the foundation of APLU as we know it. We pride ourselves on providing access, equity, and workforce readiness, scientific breakthroughs, and also helping our local economies. When I've talked to some of the folks in House offices, asking what makes a difference to a House member, and they said, we want you to be able to show what you do for their members in their district. That's what's important. When you ask the question, since the Senate is statewide, what do you do for Senate? It's workforce development, it's opportunities, it's graduating students. And so we want to align our messages with what's of interest to those offices that we work with. This is what we look like by the numbers. Every Carnegie Classification Research 1 institution is a member of APLU. Every land grant institution is a member of APLU. And in fact, if you look at the bottom part, we have 8 Canadian, 5 Mexican, and then our historically Black colleges and universities. On the ag side, we count about 115 members, including 1994 tribal colleges as being part of the ag work that we do. This slide is not to create a lot of anxiety, but tell you we're a very complex system. To be a member of APLU, you have to either have a council, which is you're a member because of an elected position, like a president, government affairs, academic programs, or a commission. And a commission is more cross-cutting around discipline areas and around topics that cut across a lot of different disciplines. And so these are the 5 boards on the commission. I would draw your focus to the second board, the Board on Ag Assembly. And if you draw yourself all the way down there, you see the sections that we have. Probably most important to you is the Cooperative Extension section and the Committee on Organization and Policy. And many of you also work with our CARET section, our Council on Ag Research, Extension, and Teaching volunteer advocates that are appointed annually by the Dean of the College of Agriculture. So we have a big system. At the end of the day, if I press the send button to go to all members of the Board on Ag Assembly, it goes to about 900 people. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what does advocacy look like, advocacy in action. And this is where I want to get you to help understand where you maybe could fit and help with us with our messaging and developing those relationships and that trust that are so important. We have an advocacy timeline that, to be honest with you, has not really been consistent the last few years because there's not been consistency in Congress. But it really starts in November at the APLU annual meeting. We develop our priorities of funding for the next year. We have that ready by December. And if you've ever come to the CARET Board on Ag Assembly Washington Conference, we have our developed one-pager that is carried to the Hill by our CARET delegates. It's the same one-pager in many cases that's used at PILD. And Bernie, one thought I had is maybe next year we can do a pre-advocacy workshop prior to everybody coming and talk about what we're seeing happening and why we think it can make a big difference. We usually are greatly involved. I think Christina and I were both at PILD this last year to talk about successful Hill trips and how to get prepared for that. The president sends out an executive budget. Supposed to be early in February. That's never happened. When he sent his out this year, it was not very supportive of land-grant universities and the work we do. In fact, there were cuts all the way across the board, with the biggest one being zero funding for Hatch, which is our ag research funding. Fortunately, it gets over to the House and to the Senate. We have really good support there, and they restored those funds for us, which was critical because we consider those to be foundational funds. And you may not know it as a county agent or as a specialist, but maybe some part of your salary is actually covered by capacity funds through the Smith-Lever funding that we receive. We look at the Farm Bill, and once again, we have a Farm Bill that expired in 2023 that is still limping along. Part of it was covered in reconciliation, a very complicated process, and now we're kind of awaiting word for what the next Farm Bill looks like. And once we get that, we will probably reach out within our whole system and say this is what it means for us and why we need you to help us in communicating to local groups. In many cases, on the state level, our biggest supporters are farm bureaus and the National Association of State Departments of Agriculture and the National Association of Counties. All of those groups, to some extent, have a local presence in your communities, and having a voice that can leverage up what we do is extremely critical to our success. Then we have a group called the Budget and Advocacy Committee, and they're the ones that really set the priority. Every section I showed you earlier, such as extension, puts together their priority list of funding. They come and present that to the BAC, and the BAC is that overarching umbrella that helps us navigate our advocacy priorities and put the message together. What we have found out and what I've been told during my time here in DC is that if you just want a percentage increase for every line you have, it means you have no priorities, and they don't like that. If you want more money to replace people or to hire more staff, they don't like that. They want to see what programs do that impact the clients that we serve. And I think most critical is we have got to have a very clear message on why this funding is important. And that's what the message that we do through the BAC. And then finally, what we do through the work of all of our groups is frame this national advocacy agenda. And that's what we share with you when you come to PILD. But as I told Bernie, I think we've got to have a more annual approach and not just 1 or 2 weeks out of the year that we're trying to do our work. We do have some guiding principles. We want to find lines that impact the majority of our members. We want to maintain some consistency. Don't undercut the president's budget request. And if that means by some small miracle, he actually proposes more than we received the previous year, then we would instantly go to that higher number. We talk about the core, and in our world, the core is we have 6 capacity lines, and that equates to about 79% of the funding that the land-grant universities get. And then we have competitive funding lines, it's about 89%. And so we always focus on that core. Our belief is a lot of what we do in foundational funding could not happen when those are either zeroed out or the funding is decreased greatly. We want to emphasize our work on equality, and that's across the size of our institutions, across the disciplines that we do. Acknowledgement that we have land-grant universities that are traditional 1862, our 1890 HBCUs, Authority of Black Colleges and Universities, and our 1994 tribal partners. And then the biggest challenge is you want to be realistic. And so if you look at the bottom line there, another takeaway, www.land-grant.org. If you go there and just scroll around a little bit, it talks about our advocacy priorities and what we're preparing to do for the upcoming year. Also want to point out to you, we're trying to really strengthen our national impact database. Another area where maybe we should do a targeted Zoom for a JCEP, because we need more people to populate that. We drive our staff members, our congressional delegations. If you want to know what we're doing in water quality, they can go to the National Impact Database. Water quality is going to pop up, but more importantly, it's going to tell them what universities are involved in water quality, and that's very important for us. So we give that a quick view. The other thing is we're working on a couple things. We have learned that we can't accomplish what we need to do in the way of federal funding with only annual appropriations. And so we're looking at creating documents that will help us take a multi-year approach. If you have read recently on the reconciliation package, the big beautiful bill, we were given $125 million a year for research infrastructure. That's mandatory funding per year. So $125 million a year over 9 years is $1.125 billion with the B. We have never gotten that kind of investment before. It's not as much as we need because we've identified about $11 billion in deferred maintenance needs, but it's a start. And it's the first we've ever gotten money at this magnitude. And it's the first time under this kind of environment that we've had great friends in the House and Senate step up. And so we're trying to replicate that. Ag Innovation, which was formerly known as the Experimentation Section, they rebranded themselves, are working on a roadmap. Extension is working on Extension 25 to 2035 roadmap. Vonda Richardson from Florida A&M University presented that to you at the PILD meeting. We're trying to incorporate the importance of academic programs because land-grant universities is a 3-legged stool, research, teaching, and extension, and we want to make sure we acknowledge the strength of that partnership. Our big push is going to be the value of capacity funding, very critical for many county offices and for state programs. We're looking at how we crosswalk. We don't want to look siloed. We want to show that we look for opportunities across all of our disciplines, and that's very critical. And then we want to showcase who we are and what we do. I think, have done for 125 years in our country amazing things that have not been fully appreciated or recognized. Not just what we like to say is the moral act and the sons and the daughters of the working class having a chance for education, but the amazing research that impacts producers, the extension outreach and engagement that supports many of our stakeholders. We need not just take pride in that, but we need to talk about what that does for our country and how that makes our country better. So we'll talk about this later. We're already going to make the slides available, and Christina and I will give a little more thoughts to what we think JCEP can do. But as I said earlier, one great thing you could do is do a one-pager for things that are important for your county. So producers will be able to have input to that, and you can carry it as an educational piece to people that can make a difference in your state, and even the associations, we need their support. A one-pager just talks about that we need to continue to support our programs, background, and really talking about the personalization of what that ask is. How do we leverage our resources? How do we establish priorities? And we actually put together a little cheat sheet for our CARET delegates. And once again, when it comes time for PILD to roll around, we might want to put a cheat sheet together that would help JCEP members going to the Hill be a little more focused on what that looks like. And I want to leave you with this, and this is my goal, is that we position our land-grant universities for long-term success, that we look at those opportunities that show how we are making a difference, that we talk about the leveraging of federal funding and how it supports our programs and our offices. We want to create a message where people would talk about, hey, I didn't know our land-grant universities did that. In many cases, it's connecting the dots. I didn't know 4-H is part of Extension, or I didn't know Extension was part of the land-grant university. We need to make it easier for people to understand us in a very complex system that we have. We need to develop that unified message that the voice that Christina I carry forward is supported by what's done and the work at the state and local level. And finally, we got to figure out these long-term funding opportunities, and they may not just be in agriculture. If you talk about national security as food security, we need to look at Homeland Defense. We look at Department of Defense. Extension's had a great win already with the IGNITE program and partnerships and funding through the Center for Disease Control. We think that the talk that's coming out of the Department of Health and how do we make our communities healthier, better food choices, reduce chronic diseases, can be accomplished through a stronger partnership with Extension. And so we are always looking for those opportunities to help lead where we think the system should be, pay very close attention to what's being said at the federal level, and at the end of the day, be aggressive in how we come forward with our advocacy and with what our requests are. So with that, Bernie, I'll turn it back to you, or you can transition straight.
Great.
You know.
Yes, actually, can we pause for a second? There was one quick question in the chat from Mike, and I don't know if this is the correct time to ask the question, but we can chew on it a smidge. Mike asked, what are the proposed federal budget levels right now? And do you foresee Congress changing this?
So
Excellent. Where's Mike from? Mike, you want to put your county in there?
And I feel like that's the perfect tee up as well, because that is the bulk of my presentation here as well. So
Perfect.
hopefully we can make that clear and talk through it. But yeah, always happy if y'all, we always love to hear where you're from. Ohio.
He's from Ohio. Yep. Thank you, Mike.
Thank you so much. Sorry, Bernie, if there's anything else before I hop in, but yes, we will go through that in detail.
Thank you, Christina.
Alrighty. I will see if now I will hold my breath and make sure I'm able to get my screen shared here. Let's see. Oops. It's not. Let me fix 1 second. Switch screen. How does that look now?
You got it. Thank you,
There we go. Alrighty. Well, thank you all so much for having me, and thank you for taking the time to attend this webinar today. It's always so happy and so great to have your engagement. And so I just echo everything that Doug said. And so my part of the conversation, as Doug mentioned, so I help do government relations for APLU BAA. So representing a lot of the work that you all do, and I work directly with Extension as well. So work with a lot of the directors of Extension, and to try to kind of set the priorities for the year. And so my goal with this presentation is to talk through everything that's happened over the last 6+ months to a year. So we're going to cover appropriations, budget, and funding. We're going to cover how the Trump administration and the change in administration has been impacting things and impacts the outlook for funding. We're of course going to talk about SNAP education, and other ways that the recent changes in the administration, changes in Congress are impacting the work that you all do. And then going to also talk a little bit about kind of how that impacts your advocacy. But our hope here is really that this is informative for you all to understand the congressional process and how it interacts with the agencies, and then how, of course, that trickles down to impact you, and makes you better advocates, both in your state, with your communities, and also when you join us out here in DC, which we always love to invite you out to do that. So just kind of jumping into things, and again, introducing myself, Christina Laridaen. I'm with Lewis-Burke Associates, born and raised at the University of Minnesota, went to the University of Minnesota. My mom is a proud master gardener, so have always been a huge fan of the extension system. So of course, love working with you all. But getting into what's kind of going on in the federal government. So we touch on all things federal. So I'm going to talk about everything from Congress to the agencies today, what's going on at USDA, what's going on in the House and Senate. But the bottom line for kind of their overarching message is, if you haven't noticed, is that there's been a lot of change in the federal government. We've certainly been feeling it, and I'm sure you all have been seeing it on the news. This change was expected. It's been at a really, really fast pace, and change isn't always bad. Sometimes there can be good change, and we'll talk about what some of the new and exciting initiatives that the Trump administration is bringing in are. But there will, of course, always be winners and losers, as there is with any major changes and any changes in the administration. But we do know that one core goal of this administration and this Congress is to reduce the size of the federal government, and that inherently comes along with reductions in federal spending. So that's something that we will certainly get into. And of course, our goal as advocates is to make clear that the work that we do, the work that land grants do, the work that Extension does, is really critical to building the future that we want to go towards. Especially, this administration has made it clear that rural folks, rural communities, and farmers first is really a part of their priority. So we want to make sure that we're a part of that kind of train that's moving forward. And then another thing to emphasize is the way that this administration has been approaching things has been, again, to kind of move fast, make a lot of changes, and then to expect some pushback and then adapt to that pushback. So we've seen that time and time again with this administration. They make really fast, really big, sweeping changes, and then kind of see where people push back. And that's what they're taking as an indication of, okay, so we went too far in this place, and that's okay, so we'll make that tweak. So that's kind of been the approach. And then the last thing that I want to mention as we get to Congress is that Congress is very, very narrowly divided. This is one of the closest Congresses that we've had. The House is on a razor-thin margin. The Senate is also very close. So all of that means that basically everybody in the given party needs to be on board, or you need to be able to pick off some Democrats to get support to move any sort of legislation. So we'll get into kind of the dynamics and what that all means for funding in a little bit here. But I'm going to start off the talking about Congress. This is where we'll get into the budget proposals, where things are at, and then I'll talk a little bit more about the administration, how things are changing there, and then finally getting into kind of what that all means, where you all fit into this. But want to make sure that you all have a good understanding of some of the background and feel comfortable with some of these terms. So a big thing is, this is our kind of overview slide of, here are the 5 major themes and major things that are moving all at once. So that's the one thing to remember about this administration, but honestly the federal government these days in general, is that there's frequently a lot of things happening at once. So executive orders and agency personnel, as I said, we'll kind of get to that a little bit later. But these have been continuously coming out, more information, more policy changes. We actually just heard today about USDA released its plans to do some reorganizing. The high level overview of that is that USDA is proposing to move a number of its employees and facilities that it has out here in DC, and it's going to move a lot of that personnel out to the rest of the states. They have, I believe it was 5 different locations selected that they're going to kind of disseminate people out to, and they were largely selected based on where there's already a pretty decent sized USDA presence. And the goal of that, again, is part of that America First initiative to try to make sure that USDA and the agency is reaching its constituencies more directly. So that's one example of something that just happened a few hours ago that we're tracking very closely. But then getting into Congress, those 3 buckets on the right-hand side, reconciliation. We'll go into the detail on this. This is relatively rare. This is something that you can only do when you have a trifecta, and that has some spending. That's a lot of tax considerations. And this is the legislation where the SNAP Ed cut was made, and this is also the legislation where all the changes to SNAP were made, and it's also where the Research Facilities Act funding came from, and a couple of other things that we'll get into later. Budget and appropriations, this is the annual process to fund the federal government. We'll talk through this very much in detail. And then, of course, the Farm Bill, which happens every 5 years. And at this point, the Farm Bill, we have been trying to reauthorize the 2023 Farm Bill since 2023. It's now 2025. So that's another kind of added piece in all of this. All right, so quick overview of where things are at right now. So things that have happened, I've got the overview for the agencies and the administration and Congress. So hopefully that kind of keeps things separated. But things that have happened at the agencies, we've seen pauses, terminations, and changes to grants, to its grants and contracts. Some of you may have already experienced this, where the agencies have in many cases reached out saying, hey, can you change this aspect of the grant? Can you cut this subawardee? Can you make these changes? So some of you have maybe already experienced that, and that's in order to align current awards and where federal spending is going, more in alignment with what the Trump administration would like to see the federal government doing. Again, kind of getting back to that shrinking of the federal government, that kind of general ethos that they have throughout. Similarly, staff reductions, I've already kind of talked through this a little bit. As new leadership is getting their footing, they're starting to make some of these directives. Of course, Brooke Rollins is the agricultural secretary. She is from Texas, and so she certainly carries that with her, and is a big champion for agriculture. And she's also has a very, very close relationship with the president, and so that's seen as a real positive thing by a lot of folks in the ag world, because she has really been able to elevate agriculture's position within the cabinet, more so than it is with many other administrations. So that's seen as a potential positive of her leadership as well. And then getting into some of the things that have happened in Congress. So we are currently under a full year continuing resolution. A continuing resolution, or a CR, is a fancy word for flat funding. So they weren't able to make changes and decide exactly how they wanted to fund the federal government this year. And so they just said, we will keep everything flat. We will not make any changes. And that decision was made in March of this year. So they finally got around to deciding, we can't come together. We can't agree on changing things, so we will just keep everything the same. And that is generally, that doesn't happen very often. The last time a full year continuing resolution was in place was in fiscal year 2013. So it's been over a decade since that has happened. And here, as I will kind of foreshadow, we might have it happen twice in a row. So we'll see how that goes. But where we are right now in the appropriations process is the congressional method by which they fund the federal government. And the process starts with the budget request from the president. So they essentially make a big long list of all the agencies saying, if I had control over the money that the federal government spends, this is how I would spend it. And I would allocate this much money to USDA and this much money to the Department of Defense and so on. And in the budget request for 2026 that President Trump released, it proposed very significant cuts really across the entire federal government, but it did propose really deep cuts to capacity and to the programs that we care about. It would cut Smith-Lever basically in half. It gets rid of Hatch funding altogether. The big thing to note is that the budget request is a political document. It's a proposal to make an indication of the things that the administration cares about. And a lot of times they will cut very popular programs with the intent of making a show of moving that funding somewhere else to kind of highlight something that they really care about. So that doesn't necessarily mean that the Trump administration actually wanted to cut all of these programs that deeply. Usually it's a political way of kind of showing something else that they really care about because they know that members of Congress are really supportive of the programs that we have. So like I said, that the budget request just came out kind of giving that indication. And we just in the last 2 or 3 weeks have just gotten the House and Senate appropriations proposals. So these are their draft bills. And the important thing to remember here is that Congress has the ultimate say on spending. They have the power of the purse. And so both the House and Senate agriculture bills would fully fund Smith-Lever, would fully fund Hatch, would fully fund the 1890s and 1994's extension programs. And so I have another slide on that. But so that's really positive is the House and Senate, again, are very supportive of our programs. And so they are rejecting the proposed cuts from the Trump administration and would continue flat funding, which is great. The last thing that I want to note on what Congress has done, reconciliation has been passed. As I mentioned previously, SNAP-Ed was cut entirely. I'll get into more of the details on why that happened, how that happened, and then again noting that Research Facilities Act and numerous farm programs were funded. Looking forward into what happens next, again, the reorganization and relocation at USDA, that's going to begin to move forward. We'll see the Farmers First and MAHA proposals. We'll see that those agenda items flushed out a little bit more. And then the other thing that we're anticipating is a lot of encouraging of more industry partnerships because they're trying to shrink the size of the federal government, a lot of excitement around what public-private partnerships can look like. So anybody that's having unique partnerships that's bringing in private industry, the administration would love to see those. We love to hear those stories. Submitting those into our impacts database is always really helpful because we love to elevate those stories with Congress and with the administration. And then with Congress, again, appropriations is going to move forward. This is kind of my foreshadowing piece earlier. We may end up with another continuing resolution. There's potential for a government shutdown, which nobody has any fun during a government shutdown because then you can't reach out to your program managers. It's harder to draw funds down. So those generally, nobody likes them. They're politically unpopular, but there is a potential for that. Republican members of Congress, again, because they control both the House and the Senate, have been really interested in potentially passing a skinny farm bill. We call things skinny when it just basically means smaller, a shrunken down version of a farm bill to finally get that farm bill off of their plates and get it passed. There is also discussion of a further rescissions package or further reconciliation. We'll see kind of how that plays out. So that would be another version of the one big beautiful bill that was already passed, but it would for the most part have to be on different topics. So again, unlikely to kind of hit the things that we care about. And then one more thing that I want to note is that August recess is coming up, which is usually the entire month of August. All the members leave DC and they all come back to their states and districts. And it's a really great opportunity to connect with them. So we'll talk about that a bit later as well. All right, now I'm going to throw a big chart at you. So I'm sorry about all the numbers on this. I should have mentioned at the top that we will also pass around the slides so you can have them. I put a lot of content on my slides with the intent that you all can use them and reference them later. So that's why I also don't say every single thing that's on the slide. But this is just kind of a visual representation of what I was saying earlier. So I'm not sure if you all can see my mouse, but the yellow column here, that's the president's budget request that I was mentioning. Again, proposing really deep cuts. Again, here, Hatch Act, you can see cut entirely. Smith-Lever cut very significantly. And then you have the House and Senate, which again, those are the bills that we really want to pay attention to, because the House and Senate are the ones that have the final say. They're the ones that have the power of the purse. And you can see, with compared to fiscal year 2025 enacted, these numbers here in the kind of gray column. This is what was enacted. This is what we're operating under right now. And you can see here the House and the Senate keeping things almost exactly flat. So that's the good news, is that they're not going along with those deep cuts that were proposed. All right, so talking here, I want to talk through the schedule, because this is the schedule that I operate on, that Doug operates on, that people who work in DC and our advocates out here operate on, and we want to bring you all into that fold to help come and be advocates with us. And this schedule is really helpful for you to kind of determine when the best times are to show up. So this is kind of, and I'll move these along here, but so this is the outline of how the appropriations process works. And this is really where we want to focus our time, is around the appropriations process, because this is what annually determines our funding for extension. And so this annual appropriations process, again, is very critical. So we're in the middle of, Congress is in the middle of planning and prepping for finalizing their fiscal year 2026 appropriations. But because APLU and all of us involved here are a huge organization, we're actually in the process of planning out what our requests are going to be for fiscal year 2027, because we want to be prepared to hit the ground running. We want you all to have documents when you come out for PILD and for CARET. We want you all to have the nice, pretty clean documents ready to go with the requests. And you all need to have that by February, March, whenever CARET and PILD end up falling, sometimes April. You need to have those documents in hand. So we do the prep now to get those all ready for you. But in the meantime, you all and the advocates are continuing to work on getting funding and maintaining funding for fiscal year 2026. So that's what we're working on right now. So again, right here, Congress was drafting. You can see where we're at right now in the process. And then right here we are again, here's that August recess that I mentioned. This is a great time to be doing advocacy in the state. I'll talk about what that can look like at the end of the presentation. But then going forward, in an ideal world, the fiscal year ends on September 30th. And in an ideal world, we would have funding, we would have an idea of how USDA is going to be funded for the upcoming year, starting right then on October 1st. That's unlikely. It's more likely that we're going to end up with some form of continuing resolution, most likely a short-term continuing resolution. But ideally, we'd love to get these bills passed. We'd love to make sure that the administration has some direction. There was some language included in the Senate draft that basically said, we love extension. Extension is so great. We want to emphasize to the administration how important it is. So that's a really great sign that Congress is, keeping everything flat, and they are telling the administration via their appropriations bills that this is important to us. We saw that you proposed cutting it, and that's not going to fly. So all of that is a good sign. So we want to encourage them to pass those bills and to move forward with those. And then, of course, as we're making plans over here to start advocating for our fiscal year 2027, because the cycle kind of starts over again. So this is where, you all came to town and did advocacy here on 26, and then a year later, you'll come again and do advocacy on 2027. So that's really the key time is the spring. And it continues to cycle. So those are some of the key timeframes to be paying attention to. All right, so I know that was a lot of information on appropriations. I'm sorry that I have so much on Congress right now, but Congress has been very busy lately. So I want to make sure to touch on reconciliation, because obviously this has had a very deep impact on extension, on yourselves, on your colleagues, and on the work that you do and the services that you provide. So Extension, so reconciliation, I want to first start with what reconciliation is, and why you have maybe not heard of this before. Reconciliation is a term for a congressional procedure. It's a process. The bill that came out of this process was the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, or OBA. Some people calling it OB3. So the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, this was signed into law on July 4th. They started developing this right at the beginning of the Trump administration. It's important to emphasize that this was developed and influenced completely by Republican members, because reconciliation is a very unique process that can only be done if you have a complete trifecta of control. If you have single party control over both the House, the Senate, and the White House. And essentially what reconciliation is it's a way to tweak the taxes and tweak things that relate to spending and that relate to federal revenue or spending. And it's a way to tweak it, but you essentially are getting around the filibuster, which is a Senate process that requires you to have 60 votes in the Senate. So maybe you've heard of the filibuster before. It requires you to have 60 votes to pass legislation. But if you have complete control of the House, the Senate, and the White House, then you can do this kind of tricky process called reconciliation to pass massive spending, massive tax cuts, tax changes via reconciliation. The last time that this was done was actually the Inflation Reduction Act passed under the Biden administration. So you may be familiar or maybe have heard of that legislation as well. That was also using this same procedure. So that's why you can pass massive legislation when you have complete control. But because of that, it doesn't require basically any Democratic buy-in whatsoever. So that's really key to understanding. We got a lot of questions from different folks in different states and with different representatives asking, how can I help? My member is maybe not, my member has told me that they're not able to be helpful. Why is that? That's because, again, it's one party control. So this is one of those kind of flukes in the system where it's Republican or it's majority party only kind of drafting and developing it and passing this legislation. So they prioritize passing tax cuts and reducing taxes for Americans and companies. And so that is why, in order to kind of offset the cost of those tax cuts, you need to cut other programs that the government was spending money on. So each congressional committee was directed, and they had a quota of, you have to cut this amount of money. And that included the Committee on Agriculture. So they had to develop a list of cuts that they were going to make, and that was how they were going to, contribute their money and say, this is how we're reducing the scope of the federal government in such and such ways to meet the quota that they had been given by leadership. So this is where the major impacts come in. So the One Big Beautiful Bill Act impacted tons of parts of the federal government, of course, student aid, student loan programs, endowment taxes for universities. That was mostly for kind of elite private universities. Changes to Medicaid and SNAP eligibility, which are, of course, major and are going to have impacts on state budgets. And then, of course, SNAP education was eliminated. So I'm going to take a quick moment and talk about SNAP education, because I want to make sure that we talk through this thoroughly. And again, I'm always happy to answer questions on how this happened. So we talked with the agriculture committees just recently about everything that went down. And I want to emphasize that we advocated staunchly to get this out. We also had conversations about, when it became clear that they needed to cut SNAP education or make cuts to SNAP education in order to meet their quota, because that's really essentially what it came down to. SNAP education on the whole, over the 10-year life of the bill, is essentially is all totaled up to be about $550 million. And so that was essentially used as an offset. They used that to help to meet their quota. And really that's what it came down to, is they needed to make certain cuts. And the decision basically came between cutting deeper into SNAP and cutting SNAP education. And so we even had conversations about, if SNAP education has to be eliminated, can we delay the time frame for when the SNAP education gets cut? So the changes to SNAP don't go into effect until 2028. So we were trying to make the argument that the SNAP Ed changes should not go into effect until 2028. But ultimately that would have changed the overall scoring, the overall cost and they really needed that total cost. We know that several Republican members were very unhappy with this being in there. They did not want to cut SNAP education. It was not something that everybody was excited about. And so ultimately they kind of needed the numbers, and unfortunately this is where it landed. It's of course very unfortunate. We can also talk about, we've already started talking internally about what are the next steps for this. What is the future of Extension's role in health and education and nutrition education? Because we have so many great people, we have so many great relationships built up that it would be horrible to lose all of those. So we've already started having conversations about what are other parts of USDA, what are other ways that we can frame this? Is MAHA an opportunity? Is HHS interested in this elaborate, this excellent network that we have reaching rural communities? So we're starting to think about what that might look like, and we would love for you all to be partners in that. But I wanted to make sure to pause and take time to talk about that. Again, any further questions, happy to answer them. But these were the main items that I wanted to cover. Also mentioning again, as Doug mentioned, that there was funding in there, $125 million per year for the Research Facilities Act that would go to land grant universities, as well as funding a number of orphan programs. That includes the 1890s Scholarship Program, FAR, the Foundation for Food and Agriculture Research, the SCRI, the Specialty Crop Research Program, and a couple of other items. Those all had not been funded via the Farm Bill extension and were funded through reconciliation. So I wanted to make sure to mention those as well. All right, so going to stop on reconciliation, and then want to talk briefly about Farm Bill, because it's something that we get asked about a lot. What is happening with the Farm Bill? As you can see with my sort of cheeky crossing out of each of the years, the Farm Bill process has really been dragging on. So the House and Senate in last Congress released a couple of frameworks. We developed priorities, feels like eons ago, we as APLU and all the land grant universities, that of course included support for extension programs, and all of those for the most, and also I should mention support for 4-H, name and emblem, for example. So all of those priorities for the most part were included. There were very few of APLU's priorities that did not make it into one, or in most cases both, the House and Senate frameworks that were released last Congress. We haven't seen any new versions of the bill drop yet this Congress, this year. But we do know that the Senate Republican, because the Senate flipped this last year. So we do know that they are working on drafting a skinny bill, and so we'll see what that ends up looking like. But again, we know that Senator Bozeman, who chairs the Senate Agriculture Committee right now, we know that he's very, very supportive of our programs and has long been a champion. And so we do expect that will continue to maintain and have most of our priorities in it as well. It's really at this point just a matter of timing. We really hope that this can eventually get done. It's good for farmers. It's good for us and our program. So we're really hoping that they can make progress on that. The one thing I will mention is that reconciliation, everything that I just mentioned, is a major complicator for getting the Farm Bill done, because as I mentioned earlier, they were shaking the couch cushions to get every free penny and every unused dollar out so that they could put it towards, their quotas, put it towards the tax cuts. That means that every free dollar for passing the Farm Bill was basically used. So it's going to be really difficult to find any free money to get a Farm Bill going. All right, so I just have a few more slides here on agency and Trump admin impacts, and then kind of where you all fit into this, and how all of this knowledge, hopefully all this information is helpful in your advocacy. So a couple final things to talk about as far as what the administration is doing. Of course, Congress has been the real star of the show lately, because they're the ones who set the funding amounts. But we also want to recognize that some of you, of course, capacity funds for the most part, have been able to flow pretty freely. They haven't been hit too hard by any grant freezes, grant pauses. But any of you that may have AFRI grants or may have other grants with the federal government may have seen some of those grants be frozen, paused, terminated even. So most of those have become unstuck and have been moving forward, which is a really positive sign that we're seeing some progress happen. And we're also seeing new requests for proposals, RFPs, start to come out slowly. So that's also a positive sign that USDA is catching up. The gears are coming loose, so that's a great sign. Some other kind of odds and ends items that have kind of risen to the top as priority areas. Avian influenza, especially at the beginning of the Trump administration, was a big priority area. They announced $1 billion for testing, therapeutics, research, and aid for producers. We haven't seen the awards come out for this yet, but there was a solicitation that went out for $100 million for universities to do work on this and research different aspects of the avian influenza challenge. So that was a great program that came out. Another thing that is kind of a question mark as far as what the impacts are, but we really see as an opportunity, is the Make America Healthy Again. This has been a priority over at HHS with RFK Jr. It of course has a lot of impacts on the agriculture community writ large. Very controversial, I would say, within the ag community. Some farmers are very in favor, some are very much not in favor. Some commodity groups are loving it, some commodity groups are really, really hating it. So there's certainly a lot of controversy within big ag. I think that extension certainly has a role to play, especially given our role doing health education, nutrition education, and that kind of One Health piece that extension people are so heavily involved in. I think there's a real opportunity there, and it's really just a matter of kind of seeing what that's going to look like. We are expecting a new memo out of the MAHA task force that's likely to come out in August. So we'll certainly be monitoring that to see if there's any opportunities there that we could tap into some new funding for extension. And then last thing I have already kind of talked through, so I won't go into the details, is relocating USDA. I kind of mentioned, and then this Farmers First agenda. So anything to help bring down the input costs for farmers, efficient nutrient use. You all do amazing education work on how farmers can take advantage of different tax programs that may benefit them. Or just information about different conservation programs where they may be able to kind of pad their bottom line, all things like that. They're also talking about doing research and development on new mechanization efforts to reduce the need for labor input costs. That's something that I've heard buzzing around USDA. So this Farmers First piece has been a big priority of Secretary Brooke Rollins. So that's something that we're monitoring to see how we can plug in there as well. Okay, so my last slide before we hop into questions is how do we apply this knowledge to our advocacy? Really, the purpose of this talk today was to hopefully inform you about everything that's going on so that you are ready to hit the ground running in the summer, which is when a lot of the touch points, the natural touch points in the state happen. And so want to talk through some of the key times that you can check in and some of those messages. So August recess, I already mentioned, this is coming up right now. Really big deal to be trying to connect with your members of Congress and or their staff. They usually always go to state and county fairs. You can invite them to, if you're doing different extension education programs, you can invite them to those sessions, or if they are coming to campus, you can absolutely, ask for extension to be involved in those types of things. A lot of times, either your deans will be involved or your government relations people and the leadership at your university will kind of be in charge of making those invitations. We love to have extension people involved at those, and the state fairs and county fairs, we know we have extension agents running all over those, extension champions all over those. And so those are great times to have kind of casual conversations to really tell your story and to talk about the important work that you do. Also, something that we've been seeing more of is farm visits and roundtables, being able to have those conversations with even candidates, or when your representatives come to the state, kind of joining those to be able to talk more in depth and into the nitty-gritty of the work that you all do and how you support folks. So that's August. That's coming up just next month. You'll hopefully see your members of Congress around. And then in fall of 2025, that's a great time to be kind of promoting. We need to get appropriations done, putting pressure on Congress to make sure that they get appropriations done. I'll also add an addendum here, is that right now, and this is a bit complicated, but we're certainly working with your extension directors on this. But right now, in terms of spending down the final dollars on SNAP education, we know that every SNAP Ed program is different in terms of any remaining funds that they have. But we do want to try to make sure that if there is any remaining funds with your institution for SNAP education, that you're able to spend that out to its entirety, and they're not just going to cancel all of the funds come October 1st. Or any remaining funds. So that has been a big priority. If you know that your institution has a lot of remaining funds, again, we're working really closely with extension directors that are kind of handling this as well. But that's one thing to be advocating for, to say like, hey, we want to make sure that SNAP Ed is properly sunset. Given that this program was canceled, we don't need the rug, further pulled out. So we want to make sure that you all are able to spend out the funds that were allocated. And then again, as I mentioned kind of in the previous slides, that spring 2026 and 27, so next spring when you fly in, hopefully again, using all of this knowledge. And one thing I want to mention here, and this kind of brings us into telling your story and who some of the best communicators are for this. Farmers, small business people, different commodity association groups, those are all huge champions for us. And the more that you all can share our story and share the work that we do with those folks and say, hey, it's really important that you, the corn growers, it's really important that you and your local state corn growers are emphasizing that, hey, extension is really important to us as well, and to the work that our members do. Those groups have a lot of sway with members of Congress. So of course you want to be doing direct advocacy with members of Congress, but also educating and talking to the other farmers in your community, businesses, trade associations in your community, and folks that you have connections to help kind of raise it on their radar as well, because those folks really do have the ears of members. So telling their story, telling kind of individual stories, some statistics are always helpful as well. But again, really those personal stories are most helpful. The other thing that would be very helpful if you all could do is make it very clear how extension is funded. So hopefully this presentation was a little bit helpful in making that clear, but just to make it very crystal clear, when it comes to the federal government, extension is funded through capacity funds, which comes from Smith-Lever, 1890s extension if you're at an 1890 institution, and 1994 extension lines. So those are kind of the codes, if you will, the key words that is an indication of, I need more funding to go to the Smith-Lever line and to these three major lines. And then the states chip in to match those funds, but it all kind of starts with the federal government. And so making it really clear, not only to members of Congress, the role that they play in this, but again, also to those, to the farmers in your community, to those commodity groups, small businesses, so that they can be advocates as well. And then my last piece of advice on this is to really frame your work through current hot topics. I've heard some amazing stories about extension agents working in North Carolina that helped during and post Hurricane Helene, doing disaster support. That those stories are so moving and so amazing. Tell those stories, the framing it through the current things that are going on, input cost increases, the prices, whether it be through inflation or tariffs, talking through how you've been supporting people, how you've been supporting your community. Invasive species have been in the news nonstop, supporting youth development. How are you doing things to support kids who want to go into the trades or kids who want to go into STEM? That's a huge point of interest right now with this administration and with Congress. So those are big areas that we definitely encourage highlighting. So I know we have some questions in the chat. Those were all my slides. Sorry, that was a lot of information, but happy to take questions.
So
and I will stop sharing.
Christina. We do have one question from Lindsay. Can you expand a little bit on what you mean by money to get the farm bill going? Could you please clarify what this means?
Sure. So the farm bill the farm bill is legislation that costs money because it runs programs. And so the farm bill does things like it funds the base of, well, traditionally it funds the base of SNAP benefits and how much people receive, and all of that costs money, and it's all kind of a system of taxes come in and go out automatically for SNAP. The same thing with commodity prices, for example, crop insurance. Changes to any of those things, changes to how much money SNAP recipients get, changes to reference prices, all of those things cost money for the federal government. And they're all tweaks to those things are generally made through the Farm Bill. And actually, maybe we should do something more simple. SNAP Education or Research Facilities Act, for example. Those things cost money. And because reconciliation basically spent any remaining, loose couch cushion change that they had, they put all of that money into passing reconciliation. That means there's very little left in the piggy bank to make any of the remaining changes. The good-ish news is that, especially if you're a farmer, the good news is that reconciliation, recognizing that getting a farm bill was going to be hard to do, they actually made a lot of those changes to reference prices, crop insurance, commodity, those types of things. They actually made a lot of those changes in reconciliation. So a lot of it is already paid for, but there are still some other priorities that cost money to move forward. And so that's what I mean when I say it's going to be hard to pay for a farm bill, because they kind of spent all their savings on reconciliation. So there's not a lot left to do anything more that they would want to do in the farm bill.
Great. Thank you so much. Now, another question, Christina. Sheila, and we hear this a lot, could you briefly go over the difference between education, advocacy, and lobbying?
Yes, and this is a great question. I would love to have Doug chime in as well, but I will start off. So this is a question we get all the time, and a lot of times I do want to emphasize and encourage you to check in with your institution, because some institutions are a bit more sticklers about it, a bit more nervous about it than others. And so, this is one of those things that's a little bit of an art, not necessarily a perfect science. But in general, the definition of lobbying, which I think a lot of people get nervous about, you have to do a significant amount of the time that you spend being paid. So in order to lobby to the point where you would need to register and notify the federal government and would have to worry about disclosing the work that you're doing, I think it's about 20% of your work has to be focused on lobbying. And I imagine, and on convincing members of Congress to do something. And specifically, it would have to be convincing a member of Congress or their staff to do something. If you're not spending 20% of your time doing that, then you and getting paid for it, then you don't really have to worry about it, about lobbying and reporting and things like that. Advocacy is for everyone. Anyone can be an advocate. That's kind of like a nice term that we all use, because everyone is able and has a role to play within their government, whether it be state, local, or federal. So anyone can be an advocate. You don't need to report on that. And then, of course, educating, that goes back to the point that I made earlier about we want to make sure that people know how education is funded so that they know the role that they play in it. And so I would say that's a big part on the education front. But Doug, I wanted to leave you if you had anything else to add on that.
No, I think the white line is, are you asking somebody to vote a specific way or not? If you're asking for a vote, you have crossed that line from education to lobbying, or in some worlds, advocacy. And so I encourage, even when PILD is here, what you are is you're educating. Unless you cross a line and when you get done meeting with House Member X, you say, oh, by the way, we really expect your vote on this issue. Then you've crossed over that line where your university probably wanted to report that. So I would just stay in the area of educating and informing. And once again, we talked about program outcomes and the benefits of those programs. And when 4-H kids go, we don't say, tell them you got to support extension because that is 4-H. Tell them that it's an important program and thank you for what you've done, and stay away from a specific ask. It's very important. And I want to back up and pick up on a couple other ones. One, I'm going to respond in more detail to Marcia because I have a very strong feeling who Marcia is, being based out of Montana. But I think, Marcia, a couple things happened to us. One, we were totally caught unaware. of the total elimination of SNAP Ed funding. It was on nobody's radar screen. The other couple issues we had is when we talk about our advocacy efforts, that never come forward from the extension directors as priority funding area because it's never been a concern before. And once again, I think SNAP education was kind of a victim of their own success. We assume people appreciate it and they would just continue to support it. And maybe the most complicating two factors I'll share with you is one is we're a subcontractor. And when that information came down, I think a lot of the state departments of health, or whoever manages the money in your state, probably didn't want to make a hard public stance against the administration. And so therefore you didn't have a strong advocacy group that would move forward. And SNAP Ed advocacy has never been part of our portfolio. And there's reasons why, not. The SNAP Ed Program Development Committee and money ran through South Dakota. It didn't run through APLU. It was something that has never just been a part of what we have done in the past. And so what we're doing now, I think Christina alluded to this, is we need to stop saying SNAP Ed because it has a negative connotation now. And our discussion is nutrition education programming moving forward. We have lost connections in rural communities that we were the only resource they had in making better food choices and stretching your food dollar and making better nutrition wellness. We feel like this is one of those opportunities to align with the Department of Health if they really want people eating healthier to reduce chronic diseases and to enter into better wellness programs. They need extension. We've got a proven track record. We've got people across the country. We can do that. And so the extension directors are putting together a nutrition education working group to think about what that pathway is moving forward and how it can make a difference. I want to make sure we go back and have adequately addressed, let's see, who from Ohio capacity? Was that Mike? Yeah, Mike.
Yes.
What we were doing with FY26 moving into 27 is we're keeping the numbers the same as what we proposed in 26. And so all those numbers have a pretty aggressive increase, average around 20%. If you look at Smith-Lever funding across the country, it's about $315 million. It's the highest funded capacity program we have. It's the second highest funded line in the budget for the National Institute for Food and Agriculture. AFRI Competitive Ag Research is the highest at $435 million. So our goal is to, what Christina said, is to stay level from last year. We have to understand we did not get funded at the request that we had. And so we're going to run that request one more year and try to look for some potential wins. But more importantly, we are getting ready to launch a major capacity campaign in FY28. And by major, we think that is the foundational funding that has the greatest opportunity across our country for all of our land-grant universities. And we're thinking a minimum of 20%, maybe up to 50%. So if you take a line that's at $315 million and double that in a 2018 ask, it's a fairly good ask, but it's doable. And we're taking some confidence and maybe momentum from our Success with Research Facilities Act, which was a 5-year process. So we understand it's a long-term process, but that's what we're trying to do to position ourselves as moving away from annual appropriations that never give us the kind of funds that we need in 1 year to multi-year strategies. And let me also shout out to Casey. I know definitely who Casey is, and thanks, Casey. You've been in this game for a long time too, and I think the most difficult thing is what's appropriate for your role within the system. How do you understand the complexities? And I think, Bernie, what we need to take advantage of the great resources with the Lewis-Burke Associates. And, we wouldn't mind sitting down a couple times a year. Anytime we can do a webinar and reach 200 plus people, that's a good day for us. And we need your voice. We need your support. We need your awareness. And so I hope we can be able to continue on with that. And Marcia, I have my one-on-one with WADED next week, and I'll be sure to bring forward your hello.
I just want to pipe in, everyone. We do know there's questions in the Q&A box, but we have one more that we're going to address before we move to Q&A. We've got Caitlin who asks, services, programs, and efforts that are being removed from government, who do you think will fill the gaps? Private sector or do those programs now fall to grassroots efforts?
We are stepping to the edge of the cliff. And I think we are going to see state governments, whether they're red, blue, or purple, say you can't pass on these expenses to us. There is no way. And you read every day in the paper about some states that are closer to a financial cliff than anybody else. But when you talk about passing potentially support for higher education, for Medicare and health issues, they've got 4 or 5 big things that will be passed down. And I think, Caitlin, that is the question that's going to be asked louder. And that's going to be one of the deciding points when Congress has to vote on these budgets, is how much are they willing? Because at the end of the day, a senator and a House member is elected from your state. And they better be able to defend what we're calling pay forward. If it's not done at the federal government, who's going to do it? Christina, you probably have more with your advocacy hat that's more technical than that.
No, I agree. I think this is a big question mark. I think some will certainly just go by the wayside. But I do think that this is kind of an opportunity for industry, nonprofits, and universities to kind of step into unique relationships with the federal government that they haven't had before.
You know, a great example, I was talking to our Dean of Forestry at University of Idaho, and Idaho is a very forested state. His specialty is really wildfire mitigation and recovery. And he said the state of Idaho cannot backfill the amount of federal dollars that they're in a position to lose, and private industry can't do it. There's only so much nonprofits can do. So I think we are just at the very beginning of what that discussion is going to look like. And I think for me, some confidence is the fact that Congress did not fall right in line with the president's executive budget request. I think if you look at the map of how the president was elected, almost every rural county, I think I saw somewhere like 85% of the rural counties across the country voted for him. Every one of the swing states that we felt like what they're called purple states now thought could have gone blue or red, everyone went red. And so I could see where the president feels like he has a mandate, and I think people wanted change, but I think they wanted surgical change. They wanted a process. They didn't want a chainsaw. And I think now, after his first 100 days, people are starting to understand these aren't numbers for employees. These are people, families, and careers. And when you talk about shutting down USDA service offices in communities, whether it be NRCS or FSA, that means farmers have to go further. But it also means people lose jobs and there's less kids in their schools. And so I think it is now becoming not a numbers game, but a name and face game. And people say, oh, I voted for that, I wanted that. And then they hear the impact. They say, well, maybe that's not quite what I voted for. So I'm hoping we have moved, and I think Christina covered this, we moved beyond a period of just executive orders coming out on a Friday and anticipating they'd be enacted by Monday. I think we've moved beyond that. I hope we've moved beyond that. APLU is an association that's almost 120 years old, and we've never sued the federal government. We sued them 5 times in the last 100 days because somebody's got to put a stop. And we provide coverage to your individual universities, especially if you're in a red state, that cannot go publicly against the president because it looks like you're going publicly against your elected state officials. They can't do that. But we thought these were critical enough that we needed to bring attention to them and get some court rulings on how far can the executive office lead in the way when it comes to the appropriations process, which is the Constitution given to the Congress to do. So, very interesting time to be in DC.
So Doug and Christina, there's a couple others. The one question here is the administration has stated that they support farmers, rural areas, healthy food, but the actual actions and policies they take are hurting these ideas and communities. For instance, SNAP-Ed impact and Medicaid cuts on rural hospitals, terminating funding for programs like LFPP and the regional food business centers. Are we able to trust what they say given this discrepancy?
Doug, do you have an answer to that?
Christina covered it a little bit, the difficulty we have right now. I think there's a huge trust factor. They're starting to ask questions, if you really feel like the rural communities elected you and you're doing things now, they're going to have adverse impacts to rural communities. What does that look like? I know in Montana, critical access hospitals out in rural areas, close enough you can get to, are already fragile at best, and without the funding they need. Now you can debate, okay, PBS and the other things, the public broadcasting stuff. You can debate. I saw a thing now with that. Without that, then rural areas have no access to information. Well, Montana's pretty rural, and I've traveled Montana a lot, and I think every hotel I stayed in had cable TV. So I don't know if that argument's going to hold water. I love public broadcasting and the things that they do, but the bottom line is, even right now, if you're in production agriculture, even producers are saying this is painful, but we're willing to undergo the short-term pain for the long-term gain. Well, August 1st is going to be the next high water mark on what happens with tariffs. And if you look back to 2019, when we had the embargoes against China, we lost the greatest number of farms in 2019 than we have until this year. And we are at pace to have an all-time record number of farms go out of business. So at some point in time, I would hope, if there really is the notion that rural America helped put this administration in power to do things that would benefit our country and change the course of our country, I am just hopeful that it's time for a strategic evaluation of what that means long term. We're moving beyond short-term damage. We're moving beyond long-term implications it's going to be hard to get away from. And I do think, one thing I guess I want you to know, we got really good people in an executive office, in the House and the Senate, that are D's, R's, and even independents. They have good hearts. They want to do the right thing. And I would just hope we can now slow down long enough to think about the unintended consequences that are a very likely reality of some of the moves that are happening. And we're the best message. That's what I want to tell you. That's why I'm encouraged. And Christina said, go to the county fair. Not just go to the county fair and invite them to the county fair, but make sure you understand their university policies, but take a picture with them, put on social media. There are staffers up here that track the number of times their member shows up in social media. And we had a thing one time, and I talked to one of the staffers. So I'm going to put out a note. And he said, boy, when you put out that note, put hashtag Congressman, whatever. He said, we read that, we pick up on that. And you look at the multiplier effect. If you put something out and other people will also retweet that. Once again, Doug is saying to understand your university policies and talk to your university communications people. But we're missing an opportunity to tell our story a whole lot better.
Okay, next question. I was under the impression that SNAP-Ed was a congressional mandate and therefore required to be funded. Am I completely mistaken about that? And that's from Chris.
I love this question because this gets into the nerdy part of how the government works. So you are not completely mistaken. You're actually exactly correct about that. But yeah, so how it works is, and those of you who maybe have worked with me before know that I love to compare the federal government to any regular old person's credit card statements and how you use your own banking. So mandatory, there's a difference between mandatory funds and discretionary funds. So which is central to this. Mandatory funds are changed in the Farm Bill. And they also can be changed via the tax code, and it's like an automatic payment. You've basically set up your systems to do an automatic payment. And then discretionary funds, which is where Smith-Lever funds come from. It's where all of our extension capacity funds, 1890s, 1984s, is where all of the AFRI funds come from, discretionary. And that's like you're going to the register, you're paying for this. Right now, I am deciding every single year, I want to buy these things again, and I want to pay for these things again. But your automatic payments, which is mandatory funds, those go and pay for everybody's SNAP benefits. Those pay for Medicaid. Those pay for crop insurance commodity programs. Those are all on auto pay. So they're mandatory funds. So you're absolutely correct. They don't need to be changed every year. We don't need to generally advocate for SNAP education every single year in discretionary funds because they're on auto pay. However, what reconciliation does is reconciliation is very unique in that it can actually, for the most part, only edit mandatory funds. It can make some changes to discretionary, but it can pretty much only edit the auto pay stuff. And so that's why they were able to basically go in and turn off the mandatory funds for SNAP education. It's why they were able to make changes to eligibility for SNAP recipients, to make changes to eligibility for Medicaid recipients, things like that. That's why, and also the tax code, give tax breaks, things like that. So that's why they were able to make the changes through reconciliation. It's basically a different process, but you are exactly correct. But that's a very nerdy and complicated side of why you are correct.
I love it. So the next three questions are from a familiar name, David K. So first one is, any clear opportunities or priorities that go beyond farmers first to embrace rural communities more broadly? Rural communities that are not vital are not good places for farmers to live and work.
I would say not yet. I'm looking forward to hearing more as they will put out. I'm sure that there will be reports, there will be summits, just as any administration does. We did get a an agricultural national security framework that came out recently. So one thing that they've been focused on is certainly agricultural supply chains, as well as there's a lot of focus on foreign companies and foreign governments purchasing American farmlands and forest lands. So that's been a big area that they've been focusing on, but it hasn't really come together into a cohesive, this is what we're doing for rural America. It hasn't really come together in a cohesive farmers first plan. It's just really been one of those things that has turned into a buzzword that a lot of administration officials are saying a lot. And usually when that catches on, we see a report or something that comes out later on that they're likely developing. So I wouldn't be surprised if something comes out, but I completely agree. I mean, I think this gets back to Doug's earlier point about, I think that this administration, and I hope that this administration recognizes that rural communities carried a lot of their success. And so I hope that that's recognized and that turns into some great programs. And I think outside of USDA, we could also see things in the economic development space. This administration, the first time around, was really interested in the concept of opportunity zones, and seeing what new, the role of AI and energy and how could that be new booms for rural areas. But yeah, we haven't seen a formal plan outside of just kind of buzzwords and kind of a mishmash so far.
Great, thank you.
Let me have
David, oh, sorry, Doug.
Last week, 2 weeks ago, we had our leadership meeting here, and the new director of NIFA, Jay Hamby, was there. And Jay said the best thing we can do is bring solutions to problems that have been identified. So when you look at rural areas, I'm reminded back to a time when I was director in Texas, and probably the smallest county in the Panhandle, county judge was a good friend. His wife worked at the research center, and he told me, Doug, here's the thing that people forget about extension. You can come to our courthouse and you can buy a marriage license, you can pay your taxes, you can register your car, but the extension office is the one place in county government where you get education and opportunities. And I think as Dan that asked that question, we have got to create that message that if you want strong, vibrant rural communities, we need high band access so we can market products. We need workforce development. We need advanced educational opportunities for kids. We need information for healthcare providers. We need to be able to expand and distribute healthcare information. And at the same time, how do we help our small scale farmers that are holding 2 jobs stay in business? I think that's what we're going to see. And as Christina said, we're getting closer to that point in time. I will personally say, and I realize this is being recorded, I would personally say I'm looking forward to the day where some state governments and some of our rural elected officials stand up with one loud, unified voice and say, we're forgetting about the constituents that got us back in the White House.
All right.
And I can say that, Bernie, because I'm late career. I've learned.
We appreciate that. David's next question is, can you say more about what you mean by frame our work through current hot topics, specifically disaster support? Is this an opportunity for Extension Disaster Education Network?
I think yes, all of the above. Really what I was hoping to get at with that is if you only have, 30 seconds with you run into your member of Congress or their staff, at an event or something like that. If there's something that you know that they really care about, or you know that your community really cares about, or something big happening in the national, or even better, the local news, that's really what I mean, is if it relates to the work that you do or the work that Extension does, if you only have 30 seconds, start there. I used the disaster one as an example because I feel like it's something that has gotten a lot of traction here on the Hill when our North Carolina friends told their story about the actions that they did during Helene and what that meant. We got so many Hill staff that were like, I had no idea that Extension did this, and I had no idea that their knowledge was so critical to these communities. And the member, that meant so much to hear that from the member. So that's more like the story that I say. So absolutely, it's telling those kind of unique parts about the work that Extension does, because we do everything. We know that.
Perfect. David's last question on federal funding. Most extension money in states I know already comes from state and or local government. It is not easy to find information about funding for the entire system, either state by state or nationally. Do you have this information somewhere?
I would say aggregated on national level, not, I think, to answer the question he has. I'm hopeful that, your directors of research extension, your college dean could put their hands on that. The one thing that we know, and I think Christina alluded to this earlier, when the president had the little narrative that went through his president executive budget request, it was basically getting very strong hits at all capacity funding. It's only 4 lines in that narrative, and the last line was that we believe and want a very strong system of county extension office and a strong 4-H program. So when the line before that say we're going to cut capacity because we don't think there's any accountability to that, we don't know how it's used, and then the next sentence say we want strong county offices and 4-H programs, it means that one have work to do. Okay. Because somebody, and in fairness to Dr. Hamby, he was not director then, but all the federal budget starts with the director's budget request. And so we have some good friends in NIFA, and I kind of called them out and said, you need to talk about capacity on our behalf. It's probably the greatest value that USDA NIFA has back to our land-grant university. So we're going to spend a lot of time, David, working on that messaging, and we all carry that message together. It goes back to my earlier comment. We need to have stronger talking points for you. And we are actually contracted an outside consulting firm to help us answer the question, what is the economic impact of capacity funds in your state? And the challenge we're going to have is finding an adequate number we can justify for extension. Because I know in Texas, when I was in Texas and also in Montana, a county extension office is at least 50% supported by the county, either through salaries, through support staff, through travel, through vehicles, through dedicated space for extension. And I don't know how you put a number on that, but we need, in research, we say every dollar invested in research through capacity funding yields about $20 more. I have no idea what extension would be. It could be 5 times that much. We want a good number, show where the number comes from, and then be able to let people know it's just not a loss of 10% of your budget through capacity funds. It's a loss of 40% of your budget because you don't have that leveraging and don't have the partnerships anymore.
Perfect. So we're down to the last 2 questions. A question from Lisa Loxman. Hi, Lisa. Her question is, Farmers First is catchy, yet how does that work? Excuse me, my thing just jumped. Yet how does that work for to alleviate the barriers for youth who want to go into farming?
Yeah, I think again, we're not really sure what the Farmers First agenda is going to end up looking like. The only thing I've really heard specifically to the kind of beginning farmers and young farmers looking to take over is there's been conversation again about the land use and land purchases and wanting to make sure that young people who want to get into farming, want to expand their family farms, whatever it may be, have access to affordable land and loans for that land. That's one of the biggest things that I've heard discussed. And of course, we love the Beginning Farmer program, but there haven't been any kind of real specific policies on that, I would say, other than the kind of one I just mentioned.
Great.
Yeah, and usually I'm the one that calls Lisa and Casey to find their input on some of these tough questions. I agree with Christina. We're not on the kind of production ag side yet, but I think where we are, it's been very obvious is the president's initiative on AI specifically mentioned 4-H is an opportunity to educate young people. Uh, excuse me. I think opportunities and go back in time, 4-H youth health ambassadors will be kind of critical moving forward. I think anything that shows entrepreneurial skills is going to get the attention of this administration. Workforce development. And of course, when you look at the big launch of Beyond Ready, it's just not having more kids in 4-H, it's having more kids in 4-H that have more of a focused and clear career path, have opportunities to develop their skill sets, and that what we like to say, if you go back to the Tufts University search, is that kids in 4-H are more likely to be involved in their community, volunteer, become community leaders, give back. And so, Lisa, that's a good example of things we've done in the past that we need to refresh that language and say, look, if this is an issue, we have a solution, and we can do this together. And the hardest thing is we have to carve out a little bit of time to do this, because unfortunately, we have full-time jobs that demand all of our attention. But we are committed to really sitting back and saying, okay, it's more than just getting 10 million people in 4-H. It's about, does this have the opportunity to change the culture of our society and address some of the things that we feel are shortcomings in young people today? And I agree with Christina. Farmers First will be there next. We got this great transition of an aging farm population, of physical assets that they're going to go somewhere. The problem, as we all know, young people in agriculture, is most ag facilities are asset rich and cash poor. And they're just next to impossible for an early entry into production agriculture to be able to afford to be there and survive unless we figure out a mechanism. And I would love if USDA would expand their beginning farmers and ranchers loans and help people get into places where they can work hard and be successful. Nobody is asking for a free ride. Nobody is asking for entitlement. We're saying we need some help, and we can do this. And I think that's a message we need to have.
Very good. I think that concludes all the questions that I can either pick through in Q&A or in our chat box. I'm going to say it is almost 5:43. And I am so impressed with the amount of information that was shared today. And I have listened to both of you speak before, and I still learned something new, and I really, really appreciate it. So I do want to thank Christina and Lewis-Burke Associates for what they do year round, and Dr. Steele and the APLU for what you do year round, and definitely sharing the outstanding information today. And stay tuned for next steps for JCEP to better serve our extension professionals and follow up with some of the nuggets of ideas here today. So thank you so much, everyone. You will be receiving an email once the recording and the PowerPoint slides are available. So keep an eye out. We hope that will happen within the coming week. And thank you to everybody who tuned in today. Hopefully it helps enrich you and helps put you a little bit more at ease and feel more confident about the role you're playing locally and contributing to the awesome extension system we have here in our land grant. So with that, I'm going to say thank you, everyone. You're free to go.
And thank you so much, Bernie, for organizing this. This was really great.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.